paper I'm going to present you now is about remote work in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. Hello everyone, my name is DİACONU MAXİM. I am professor at the Faculty of Economics and Business Administration from Alexandru Ioan Cuza University of Iași, Romania, and today I'm going to present you the paper entitled The Remote Work in the Context of COVID-19 Pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed people's lives in unexpected ways. A major transformation consisted in the fact that millions of employees around the world transitioned quite suddenly to the remote work from the first time and without any preparation. Despite the digital revolution that amplified during the last decade, many companies and people confronted with difficulties in continuing the activity in the context of the lockdown. In the context in which the COVID-19 outbreak has suddenly forced most organizations to adopt this way of working, the need to examine how working from home has affected the well-being and productivity of the employees with no prior remote work experience is imperative. Since productivity represents one of the most critical points of interest of work, the present study intends to investigate if, in the context of the remote working, employees' productivity is related to social isolation and perceived overall job performance. Starting from March 2020, most of the countries all around the world implemented lockdown measures. In this context, millions of companies were forced to rethink the working methods of their employees, mainly to make the daily activities accessible from home by using the current technological tools. Even though this shift to the remote work was facilitated by government legislation, it was perceived as a relatively fast and improvised change. In many cases, this substantial change in the way of working had many flaws in implementation. However, some studies investigating the consequences of the remote work on companies and employees mention certain possible benefits with respect to the job satisfaction, job performance, organizational commitment, or work-family conflict. For instance, Boyle et al. Underline an increase in individual productivity and performance for those employees that worked remotely. This finding is also argued by those studies focused on the sectors that involved IT working tools. A more comprehensive analysis that investigated 46 studies focused on the remote work, involving in total over 12,000 employees, presented the benefits of the remote work on both supervisor-rated performance and objectively measured job performance. This meta-analysis also showed that this remote work had positive impacts on other important factors such as perceived autonomy, job satisfaction, turnover intent, and work-related stress. Contrary to all these findings, other authors identified negative results of the remote working, such as professional isolation, a reduced possibility of obtaining promotions, the breakdown of professional relationships, as well as an increase in family-work conflict. Therefore, in the context of the COVID-19, a big concern occurred because the pandemic generated anxiety, depression, and stress, especially in the case of the people that were already suffering from poor health. Studies on the remote work in times of COVID-19 have also shown an increase in inequalities between groups of employees, some of them being more satisfied and others more dissatisfied with their work. This aspect may lead, on the long run, to an increase in wage inequality among employees. Thus, many companies worried that the employees that were forced to work remotely would be less productive, either because they avoid their duties or because they might be distracted by other things in the absence of supervision. Moreover, the isolation already existing in condition of normal teleworking should be even more investigated during the pandemic conditions, since some studies have shown a relationship between the loneliness during the COVID-19, the depression, and the higher level of stress. The relationship between social isolation and job performance in a remote work environment has already been investigated. Golden, Vega, and Dino found that professional isolation had a negative impact on job performance of the employees. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the social isolation has inevitably increased, generating higher levels of loneliness. Toscano and Zappala correlated the social isolation and stress generated by pandemic with a declining work satisfaction and performance. Moving overnight a large part of the in-office work to the home work with limited information on how to use software for continuing the activity inevitably created some additional stress to employees. Suboptimal knowledge about the uses of the technology was actually considered a source of technostress. Another particularity of working from home during the pandemic is that employees have to share their workspace with other family members, including school-aged children engaged in distance learning. Some studies underline the fact that sharing the home space with others in order to work and study is often unsuitable because this becomes a distracting environment. Considering all these theoretical aspects, we hypothesize the following. First of all, self-perceived overall job performance is positively related to remote work productivity. Secondly, remote work engagement positively mediates the relationship between perceived overall job performance and productivity. And thirdly, social isolation generated by the remote work is negatively related to the employee's productivity and work satisfaction. As mentioned before, the purpose of our study is to investigate if, in the context of the remote working, employees' productivity is related to social isolation and perceived overall job performance. In order to achieve this purpose, we conducted an online study on a sample of 291 Romanian workers during the period June-July 2022. The initial sample included 300 people, but 9 of them did not experience the remote work during the pandemic or did not fill the questionnaire completely. Therefore, all of the respondents from the final sample experienced the remote work during the pandemic. Most of the participants were experiencing the remote work for the first time, while only 9.3% of them had previous remote work experience for at least 2 months. The participants mainly belonged to the 26-35 age group, while 19.2% were in the 36-45 age category, 16.2% in the 46-55 age category, 8.6% under 25, and 1.7% over 56. So the questionnaire was sent through the email and included items about general aspects of employees' work and their experience with the remote work. In particular, we were interested to find out 5 issues: self-perceived work performance, remote work productivity, remote work engagement, perception of social isolation, and remote job satisfaction. All the items were assessed using a 5-point Likert scale from 1, which meant strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. Before testing our hypothesis, we conducted correlations between the psychological issues considered in this research and the control variables, meaning age, gender, and experience with the remote work. Even though it was a weak correlation, age proved to be negatively related to the remote work satisfaction, meaning that the older the respondents were, the more satisfied proved to be with the work from home. This result is not surprising if we consider the fact that those that are younger are willing to socialize and to interact more with their peers, since only a small proportion of them has family compared to those included in the other age categories. Gender seems to have an important impact on the remote work productivity of the employees, being strongly and positively related. Thus, men are more productive than women when working remotely, while the experience with the remote work proved to be moderately and positively correlated to the remote work productivity. This experience was negatively related to the remote work satisfaction. When testing the hypothesis, we noticed the positive association between the self-perceived job performance and the remote work productivity, which confirms the first hypothesis. Self-perceived overall job performance is positively related to the remote work productivity. Those respondents who strongly agreed with the fact that they were very efficient proved to be very productive. Meanwhile, those that did not appreciate themselves as being too efficient were less productive during pandemic, as it can be seen from this table. These results confirm the fact that people's perceptions of their productivity tend to be related to the performance they have, even in the context in which they face a major change, as it was the shift to the remote work generated by the pandemic. Meanwhile, our results show that the perception of being a high-performing employee was associated with the engagement toward the new way of working, which in turn proved to be related to the productivity in the new work arrangement. According to the statistics, there is also a positive association between remote work engagement and self-perceived job performance on one hand, and remote work productivity on the other hand. This confirms the mediating effect of the remote work engagement in the relationship between self-perceived performance and remote work productivity, which allows us to accept the second hypothesis, meaning the remote work engagement positively mediates the relationship between perceived overall job performance and productivity. Our results are in line with the findings of other studies that revealed that work engagement predicts job performance. Our findings indicate that the respondents felt very acutely the forced isolation imposed by the COVID-19 restrictions. According to the results, a large majority, meaning 87.3%, agreed that they were missing the interaction with their colleagues, fact that proved to be related to a decreased job satisfaction. Meanwhile, most of the respondents, 56.4%, considered that they would have been more productive if they would not have been forced to isolate themselves from the others. Other studies also confirm that social isolation is negatively related to the remote work satisfaction. This aspect underlines once again the importance of the social relationships, since feeling away from colleagues increased the stress of working from home during the pandemic. It is understandable why the experience of loneliness is strongly related to a decreased work satisfaction and a lower perceived productivity. In the organizational psychology, there is a great debate regarding the relationship between the perceived performance and job satisfaction. In our study, we investigated this link in the context of the social isolation imposed by the pandemic, which involved working remotely. Therefore, the respondents were forced to accept this new situation, characterized by constraints about when, where, and how to work, and reduced possibilities to optimize their activities. Meanwhile, since this new context was not something that they could have changed, it is explainable why the frustration of not being able to cope with this situation and of working productively became a source of dissatisfaction in the context of the remote work. Considering all these findings, we accept our third hypothesis, according to which social isolation generated by the remote work is negatively related to the employee's productivity and work satisfaction. In the present study, we investigated if, in the context of the remote working, employees' productivity is related to social isolation and perceived overall job performance. Our first results suggest that men were more productive than women when working remotely, and older respondents were more satisfied with the remote work. When testing the hypothesis, we noticed the positive association between self-perceived job performance and the remote work productivity, which means that those individuals that consider themselves to be very efficient and to have high performance in their job, regardless of the working conditions, are productive even when working remotely. Our results showed that the perception of being a high-performing employee was associated with the engagement toward the new way of working. The remote work engagement was also related to the employee's productivity. This confirms the mediating effect of the remote work engagement in the relationship between self-perceived performance and remote work productivity. The social isolation imposed by the COVID-19 restrictions proved to have a negative impact not only on the job satisfaction but also on the self-perceived productivity of the majority of the respondents. Most of them considered that they would have been more productive if they would have not been forced to isolate themselves from the others. Thank you very much for your attention.